This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from right across the continent. But let's start with a run through the markets for you here. Some interesting developments here and abroad. So the week has started off on a fairly sour note, red numbers pretty much across the board. Some interesting data coming out of listed companies though. In Kenya, cement manufacturers, they're still bleeding money. Bamburi Cement is the latest report, 83% fall in pre-tax profits to just $6.7 million. Remember, cement consumption has been in decline since 2016, but Bamburi bucked that trend. They actually posted a 9% rise in sales. We'll be talking about Jumia as well a little later in the hour. Its shares are up over 25% as we speak. Here's what's coming up tonight. Egypt's parliament is voting on constitutional changes on Tuesday. We'll also look at the rise of Jumia after listing at the New York Stock Exchange last week Friday. And we'll introduce you to a Nigerian cleaning company that's promising to reach every home without cleaners of its own. But first though, let's start with some breaking news coming your way out of the French capital. Police in Paris say that a fire has broken out at the city's Notre Dame Cathedral. Now, a major operation is reportedly underway. Firefighters are at the scene of this historic building. The cause of the fire, though, is not yet clear. Officials, however, are linking it to some renovation work. The area surrounding the building in central Paris has been cleared. Last year, the cathedral launched an urgent call for funds to save the cathedral, which is starting to crumble. The country's president, Emmanuel Macron, has cancelled a planned address to the nation due to this fire. Let me just take that for you once again. Police in Paris are saying that a fire has broken out at the city's Notre Dame Cathedral. An operation to put it out is underway. Firefighters, first responders are on the scene. The cause of the fire at this point is not yet clear, but officials are linking it to renovation work that was going on there. The area surrounding the building in the central part of the city, that has been cleared. Last year, the cathedral did launch an urgent call for funds to save the cathedral, which is starting to crumble. President Emmanuel Macron has cancelled a planned address to the nation due, of course, to this fire at this architectural landmark. Those, of course, are some of the live shots that we're getting at this point in time of the fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral. Historic building. This will certainly keep you updated on developments on this fire as it progresses. Right, then let's come back to news on the continent, specifically in Egypt. Legislators over there are set to announce on Tuesday the final set of constitutional amendments that Egyptians will be voting on in a referendum later this month. Now, presidential terms, the extension of them to be more specific, has been the most controversial part of that package. Earlier on, the majority coalition suggested that they should allow the current president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, to stay in power up to 2034. The final draft, however, recommends a much shorter extension. CGTN's correspondent Adel El-Mahrouki has the details.
According to the Egyptian Constitution of 2014, a president can be elected for a maximum of 2 4-year terms. Parliament wants to increase that period.
I don't think that a 4-year term by any means is appropriate for Egypt. We had two extremes, from 30 years of Mubarak to 4-year terms. Our country needs stability and a long restructuring process.
The Egyptian constitution says any changes in the duration of presidential terms must be followed by guarantees.
Constitutional experts say the guarantee is to preserve the 2-term ceiling for all presidents. However, if we elongate the duration of each term, that is not a constitutional violation.
Parliament has settled on keeping each presidential term to 6 years, keeping the 2 terms limit. However, they're adding an exception for President El-Sisi.
We wanted with this exceptional term to declare our intention. We want President El-Sisi to stay longer. It's something that we believe is in favor of the country, so we don't need to hide it. The President has a vision that needs a bold decision maker, and we want him to complete that.
So far, President El-Sisi's term ends in 2022. If the referendum passes, his current term will turn into 6 years, ending in 2024. He will be allowed to run for another 6 years, which could keep him in office until 2030. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Right, and CGTN's Adel Mahroui, of course, now joins us now from Cairo with more details on this story. So, Adel, assuming that the proposed changes are approved by legislators tomorrow, what happens next? What is needed to make them law?
Well, it is definitely going to pass. As you've seen, we've had 3 members of parliament in this report, and the president has sweeping support within the House of Representatives. We're talking about around 600 members of parliament, maybe more, and the opposition voices there are about a dozen members, and that's it. What will happen next is that the final draft will be announced. This is what the parliament will be voting on tomorrow, on Tuesday. They will vote on the final draft that will be presented to the public in a referendum. 2/3 of the parliament must vote in favor of that document. Once they do, the nation will call citizens, about 60 million Egyptians, to vote on this referendum, the amendments in the constitution, for 3 days continuous vote. It is expected that the vote will be held next week around 21st, 22nd of April. Of course, the exact date will be officially announced once the parliament approves it. So after the parliament, we will be waiting for the elections committee to announce the dates of the referendum, but usually there are 3 days of voting. After that, if the vote passes, it means that it is not just a law, it is part of the country's constitution, and therefore it will enforce laws to translate these articles into action.
Indeed. So walk us through the proposed changes, because there are quite a few of them, but with particular regard to giving the head of state a lot more power over appointing judges and the public prosecutor.
So basically, with the new constitutional amendments, the president will have a wider selection in choosing the head of judicial authorities. Previously, the law states that each judicial house would select from its senior board at least 1 member. It would recommend it for the president, and the president can usually would approve that person. It's usually the top senior profession from that council. But with these new constitution amendments, the judges will have to select at least 5 from them, and the president will choose from this 5. So there is a wider selection opportunity for the president to choose from, but that list is still controlled by the judicial board of each court. There's also the establishment of a higher judicial council, which will be headed by the president. Now, this judicial council will have the chiefs of each court, along with the president and the justice minister. The main purpose, according to what we've been hearing from parliament members, is to regulate all administrative affairs for the judges. That includes salaries, appointing judges, and even raises or promoting them from one grade, one employment grade to the other. Now, it is not a direct interference in judicial affairs in terms of judgment or in terms of court cases. However, there is also an influence on the financial status and the promotion of judges. That's why it has been considered some interference in judicial affairs. However, parliament members, some of them we've talked to, they insist it is not. It is far from the actual investigation or judicial investigation into court and cases.
Indeed. So included, though, in the proposed changes as well is the addition of a second parliamentary chamber, which at least at face value would essentially raise the cost of government as opposed to lowering it. Are there proposed changes which would make the state a lot more efficient and less of a drain on Egyptian taxpayers?
Well, basically, what the parliament argues is that after about 4 or 5 years into the parliament, the one-chamber parliament, which was the first to be implemented right now, this is where the first experiment has been done since January 2011 uprising. And they believe that they need an upper house, sort of a second body that would revise the legislations they do, that would guide them, that would have more selective members that the president will choose and then for it will have more expertise to help them draft very highly efficient and perfectly worded legislations. However, in the terms you've said, I've spoken to a member of Parliament, Tariq Al-Kholi, about this exact question you've asked me. Will it cost the government more money? Let's listen to what he has to say.
Some think creating a second chamber will add cost to the government. That's absolutely incorrect. When we cancelled the upper house, all its employees joined the lower house, so the employees will be redivided with the Senate. Even the financial expenses to members of parliament will be divided between the two chambers.
So basically what happened is that when we cancelled the upper house of the parliament, the employees who used to work there went to the parliament in general, the lower house basically. And the number of members of parliament in the lower house increased from about 450 to about around 600. So what is going to happen according to the members of parliament is that they're going to bring back these employees to the upper house, or the Senate in this case, if the referendum passes, and with their budget, of course, and their salaries, in addition to the expenses to the members of parliament. The lower house number of members, representatives in it will go down from the 600 or so down to 450, and then the Senate will have about 200 or so. So this is the argument, but still, we are expecting to see renovations in the House of Representatives. We are expecting to see sort of more amendments. So it may cost a bit more, but according to their plan, or at least the intentions they officially announced, they do not aim to put any financial burden on the government. We'll see.
Indeed, we'll have to see how this plays out. Adel Makrouki in Cairo, thank you very much for the update. Now, still, of course, in North Africa, Egypt has imposed temporary tariffs of 15% on iron billet and another 25% on steel rebar. They're in place for 180 days. The government over there said the import fees aim at protecting the national steel and iron ore sector against what they describe as unfair competition. Now, remember, back in 2017, Egypt had said it would maintain tariffs on steel rebar from 3 countries, China, Turkey and Ukraine, for a 5-year period in order to protect local manufacturers. Local newspapers said manufacturers had urged the Trade Ministry to implement the latest anti-dumping measures. Of course, they say this is a result of global oversupply of billet as a result of import restrictions applied by the United States. Speaking of the United States, the president's daughter and senior advisor, Ivanka Trump, is on the continent this week for a visit for the United States Women Global Development and Prosperity Program. President Trump announced that initiative back in February. Ivanka made her first stop in Ethiopia, where she toured enterprises run by women in the region while promoting this plan. CGTN's Girum Chala filed this report.
After arriving here in Addis on Sunday, Ivanka Trump has met different women entrepreneurs working on coffee and textile sectors. And here at the UN Economic Commission for Africa headquarters, also joined by Ethiopian President Sahle-Work Zewde, Ivanka told women who came from 10 African states that the United States stands alongside women of the continent.
Mobilizes private capital.
There is no more fitting a venue than to announce an early and a key deliverable of the United States' newly launched Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative, or WGDP, for Africa than right here in the heart of Ethiopia. It's an honor to join such a distinguished group of leaders as we recognize the hard-fought gains your nations have realized.
The only sitting woman president in Africa, Ethiopia's Sahle-Work Zewde, said it is time to make concrete moves in making African women's economic empowerment a reality.
Women's economic empowerment is now more and more talked about. This is not a matter of being politically correct. It's about enabling choice and decision-making by the people themselves. Women's economic empowerment is a prerequisite for sustained development. It's about rights and equitable societies. We need to move beyond rhetoric towards concrete actions.
Ivanka Trump has also announced a new landmark initiative known as 2X Africa. Through this initiative, the United States will initially directly invest $350 million. In all, about $1 billion will go towards supporting women-owned and women-led projects in sub-Saharan Africa.
Empowering women in the economy leads to more job creation and trading opportunities, which is critical from a development standpoint to helping countries on their journey to self-reliance. Further, women's economic participation fosters greater peace and stability.
President Donald Trump's daughter, his advisor and a well-known businesswoman, Ivanka, will conclude her two-nation Africa tour in Cote d'Ivoire. Analysts say Ivanka's trip to Africa is a clear sign that President Donald Trump's attention has finally turned to Africa. Well, at least it looks like it. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Right then, some corporate headlines. Let's start in Kenya. The country's carrier, Kenya Airways, is said to be spending $142 million a year just in servicing leasing contracts assigned with financiers in order to get planes for its fleet. The latest report means that servicing loans accounts for up to 11% of the troubled national carrier's operating costs. It's way above the global average of around 5%. The American energy giant Chevron has agreed to acquire the gas and oil producer Anadarko Petroleum in a cash and stock deal worth about $33 billion. Now, the deal is expected to close in the second half of 2019. It is the largest single takeover in the global oil industry in nearly 4 years. And that also signals that shale drilling, which once was dominated by small, nimble, independent companies, has now become a battleground for the oil majors. Elsewhere, the US tech giant Apple's video game subscription service is reportedly attracting quite a bit of investment, more than $500 million. Now, the service was unveiled last month. It will feature exclusive games across iPhones, Pads, Macs and Apple TVs for one monthly fee and no advertising or in-app purchases. And finally, the German prosecutors have charged former Volkswagen chief executive Martin Winterkorn and 4 others with fraud over their role in the Dieselgate scandal. Winterkorn, as you all recall, stepped down as Volkswagen CEO in 2015 after revelations that the carmaker had intentionally programmed computers in its vehicles to detect when they were being tested and to change the running of diesel engines in order to conceal the true level of their emissions output. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Jumia keeps rallying, rising by over 20% after its listing at the NYSE. And this is the debate that just will not go away. The IMF is keeping up pressure on Nigeria to cut fuel subsidies, but will Nigeria agree? We'll find out in a moment.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, Africa's largest e-commerce firm, Jumia, has created quite the buzz globally after becoming the first Africa-centric tech firm to list on the New York Stock Exchange last week, Friday. Now, the company is enjoying an impressive run on the bourse. Its shares were up by over 75% on the first day of trading. Here's CGTN's Uche Okoronkwo now, taking a look at what this listing could mean for African tech firms and the e-commerce space.
It was a watershed moment for Africa's tech ecosystems as Jumia, often tagged as Africa's Amazon, became the first major African-focused venture-funded tech company to go public. Analysts predicted there would be a good amount of interest, and they were right. After raising over $196 million, with the sale of about 13.5 million American depository receipts at about $14.50 each, its shares soared 75.59%, trading as high as $27 per share earlier on Monday. For many retail investors, this listing is an opportunity to buy the African growth story. While this new listing does put Jumia in uncharted territory, many in Africa's e-commerce sector still question Jumia's African story. And that has resulted in the now popular Twitter hashtag, Jumia is not African. Jumia does have more than 4 million customers in about 14 African countries. But the company is registered in Germany, its headquarters are in Dubai, and its technical development is based in Portugal. The firm is also operating in a sector that is still very much in its infancy in Africa, and that shows in its bottom line. The Jumia sales jumped by almost 40% last year. The firm is still not profitable. It warned investors that it has accumulated losses of almost $1 billion since its inception, and it relies on external financing. In markets like Nigeria, consumer-focused online retail players like Konga and Dealday are struggling to remain above water, or they have completely collapsed.
Jumia, the online shop you can trust.
But though Jumia's listing does reveal little about the fundamentals of investing in African e-commerce, the consensus seems to be that it cannot be ignored as a flagship for the sector. Online commerce will play a vital role in driving a new type of African development based around technology and innovation. And after all is said and done, perhaps most important is that Jumia has now gotten people to talk more about African tech. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, Africa.
Now then, just to give you a sense of just how hot Jumia stocks are at the moment over the NYSE, it's up by 38% as we speak. And if you essentially track that back to its listing on Friday, it's up by over 140%. That's quite the run. We'll see exactly where it does top out a little later on. Now, let's still focus on Nigeria, which incidentally is also one of Jumia's biggest markets. The International Monetary Fund is urging authorities in that country and several others to scrap costly fuel subsidies and save that money instead and put it for investment in education, healthcare and infrastructure. The IMF's Managing Director, Christine Lagarde, was speaking at the fund's Global Policy Agenda briefing. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has more.
The call from the International Monetary Fund is the second in just 2 weeks. The IMF says several countries, including Nigeria, spent more than $5 trillion on subsidizing fossil fuel between 2015 and 2018. And Nigeria alone spent an estimated $27 billion between 2006 and 2018, according to a local non-governmental organization. The IMF says the heavy expenditure on fuel subsidies has hobbled the capacity of government to spend on development projects and badly needed services like education and health.
The big cost of subsidies is the pricing of the product. It's done in dollars, and then you have to establish LC in dollars and pay in dollars. So one of the big components of petrol prices is the FX cost, the foreign exchange cost. If Dangote and local refiner, the NNPC refineries come in, you will not have that huge FX exposure because retailers will effectively be paying Dangote or paying NNPC in Naira.
Nigeria is Africa's biggest exporter of crude oil, but lacks the capacity to refine enough fuel to feed its domestic market. President Buhari's government attempted to scrap fuel subsidy, but the effort did not go far. Instead, it led to repeated fuel shortages until the state-owned petroleum company resumed paying subsidies. The government is now relying on the completion of the 650,000 barrels per day Dangote refinery and the revival of its own refineries to cut expenditure on fuel subsidies. And the IMF is calling for its removal, but with caution.
People need to ask themselves who really benefits from subsidy. That's why when fuel prices go up, you see a marked rise in inflation. And inflation is not because elites are driving 4 or 5 cars, it's because the people who need petrol to produce, they pass on this cost. And it affects the productivity of the economy generally.
Nigeria is among countries with the lowest tax to GDP ratio at 6.1%. Yet it spends colossal sums on fuel subsidies. Besides scrapping fuel subsidy, the IMF is also urging Nigeria to make deliberate efforts to increase tax collection in order to improve its government's capacity in investing in key development areas. Kelechi Amakalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
We're still in West Africa. The capital of Senegal, Dakar, hosted the West African Summit for Renewable Energy. That meeting allowed participants to make an inventory of progress and challenges related to development of green energy sources across the continent.
Focused on promoting good practices to implement a successful and efficient energy transition on the continent, the meeting brought together some 30 experts from Africa and around the world. After 3 days of discussions, the experts encouraged, among other things, the development of available resources in Africa in order to reduce the cost of energy for the population.
Les ressources en Afrique sont très abondantes. Le besoin
Africa boasts very abundant resources whose need is significantly increasing. Therefore, we can only be optimistic about the penetration of renewable energies in mixed energy markets throughout Africa. In addition, many laws have been passed to facilitate initiatives and push for the development of these green energies. Technology is also improving and it's possible to combine. So the future looks very interesting for these types of energies in Africa and in the world.
Paraît très intéressant pour ces énergies-là en Afrique et dans le monde par ailleurs.
According to the International Renewable Energy Agency, by 2030, 22% of the continent's energy will be from renewable sources. In order to take full advantage of the benefits available to African countries, some challenges remain, including the integration of energy policies. Participants encourage states to close the energy gap in rural areas with solar or wind energy sources.
With the reduction in component costs that we are observing at the moment, the cost of renewable energy is starting to fall. Therefore, for the future, with the reduction in costs and the control of these intermittencies, we are sure that the energies of tomorrow will be within everyone's reach. We therefore agree that cooperation should be better strengthened and that obstacles related to access to finance should be reduced.
Africa has experienced strong economic growth in recent years, but the energy deficit remains an obstacle. Experts estimate that to provide energy for the entire continent, an average investment of $70 billion per year is required until 2030. The Dakar Summit was an opportunity to explore strategies to better involve banks in financing clean energy projects. Astatal, CGTN.
Right, and back to a developing story covered in this hour and the last one as well. Police in Paris say a fire has broken out at the city's Notre Dame Cathedral. Major operation is underway to get that fire contained and essentially put it out. Firefighters and first responders on the scene. Cause of the fire not yet clear. Officials, however, are linking it to renovation work. The area surrounding this building in central Paris has been cleared. Last year, the cathedral launched an urgent call for funds to save the cathedral, which was starting to crumble. The Notre Dame's famed spire, it's about 90 meters tall, that has fallen. Parts of the roof have also collapsed. in the course of this fire. The French president has spoken out on Twitter. He said he's sad to see a part of France burn, as it were, says his thoughts are all with Catholics across the country. He's also postponed his planned speech to the nation that was scheduled to take place later today, and he sent out his thoughts to both Catholics and France as a whole. The French Interior Minister, Christophe Castanet, has also stated that exceptional measures are being taken in order to save this particular cathedral. Right, so essentially those are the live shots that we do have at the moment of this historic building. Ground for this was broken around the 12th century, 1163 or so AD, but it was finished 2 centuries later, around 1300 or so. That's the scale of the sort of history that we're looking at with respect to this particular building. As we mentioned earlier, first responders on site trying to essentially get this fire under control. We'll bring you the latest, of course, as we get it right here on CGTN. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. China announces a major ivory bust in a continuing crackdown on ivory smuggling. And one more thing that's being automated, in this case, the extra hand you need to feed others. Details on that and lots more coming your way in a bit.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's making the headlines at this hour. Protesters have continued their sit-in outside the defense headquarters in Khartoum in Sudan. They say they will remain there and remain in the streets until a civilian transitional government is set up. They want the dissolution of Bashir's, Omar Hassan al-Bashir's National Congress Party, with its top leaders brought to justice, including the former head of state. Early in the day, the military tried to disperse the sit-in, but they were blocked by demonstrators joining hands and forming rings to prevent them from doing so. In Libya, a missile strike rocked the capital Tripoli on Monday. Several apartments in a local neighborhood were damaged, but no casualties were reported. Fighting between rival government forces in the country is now in its second week. The World Health Organization has reported at least 147 people have died and more than 600 others have been wounded in this latest eruption of fighting. The DR Congo's president, Felix Tshisekedi, has arrived in the eastern part of the country for a visit. That comes amid increased cases of insecurity across that region. Residents say they hope to work with the head of state on improving security in the area. Now, the conflict in the eastern Congo has been going on for nearly 2 decades. And finally, hundreds of thousands of people are still in need of aid after Cyclone Idai battered Mozambique, Malawi and Zimbabwe in March. More than 1,000 people have reportedly been killed by the storm, the flooding it caused and the heavy rains that preceded it. The World Bank is estimating that the affected countries at this point need over $2 billion just to cover the damage. That's a run through your headlines. All right, then, welcome back to the program. So earlier on, we spoke about Jumia, the listing of what essentially was Africa's first unicorn. It did have a $1 billion valuation not too long ago. It listed about 13 million or so depository notes over at the New York Stock Exchange at around $13 to $16. At this point, as we speak, $35.45. It's popped by over 40% in trading alone today. It's actually shot up by 144% since it listed last week, Friday. So what is it about this company that's giving so many people quite a bit of a buzz? Let's find out. Johnson Chukwu is the CEO of Cowrie Asset Management. He joins me now live from Lagos. Well, unfortunately, we do have a problem with that signal. It's just gone out. We'll try and see if we can get that back a little later. In the meantime, let's head over to China. Authorities over there have announced a major ivory bust. Nearly 2,700 elephant tusks have been seized thanks to joint operations between regional and provincial authorities. This comes a year into the country's new ban on ivory, aimed largely at protecting wildlife. CGTN's Sun Yang has the details.
It's being called the biggest ivory smuggling case in years. Nearly 7.5 tons of ivory, about 2,700 tusks worth, were seized by China's customs authorities. 20 suspects are now in custody. Monday's announcement comes 2 weeks after the joint operation.
We have a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to smuggling ivory tusks, as well as other products from endangered species. We have cracked down hard on illegal activities, and our efforts have proven effective.
The General Administration of Customs has cracked 53 illegal ivory smuggling cases so far this year, seizing some 8.5 tons of ivory products in the process. And it vows to step up its efforts with plans to develop a smart system to identify suspect ivory products in hiding.
Cracking down on ivory smuggling continues to be our priority in 2019. We will enhance international cooperation and enforcement, education and supervision.
The administration also says it's now heavily reinforcing cross-border checkup inspections.
China banned all domestic ivory trade at the beginning of last year as part of its ongoing wildlife protection project. According to a WWF survey, there had been a more than 50% decrease in China's ivory product demand and transactions as of September. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Hundreds of companies and international organizations from quite a few countries have signed up to China's massive Belt and Road Plan over the last few years, expanding connectivity around the world. Here's an explanation on what it's all about.
Here I'm at Yanqi Lake. Behind me is the venue where the heads of state met during the very first Belt and Road Forum back in 2017. Now it will once again welcome distinguished guests from all around the world. 6 years since President Xi Jinping proposed the Belt and Road Initiative, a lot of friends have gotten on board. China has signed more than 170 cooperation agreements with more than 120 countries. With regard to the Belt, there are 6 economic corridors under the BRI framework, among which the new Eurasian Land Bridge and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor are considered the most advanced. For example, the Corgos International Border Cooperation Center has connected the East and the West, attracting businesses, tourists, and logistics. Also, Pakistan's new Gwadar International Airport, the $230 million China-funded project, will link Pakistan's fast-rising port city with the rest of the world. And when it comes to the road, or Maritime Silk Road, China is now connected to over 600 ports spread out across more than 200 countries. One of the star projects, the Port of Piraeus, now serves as a significant transit hub for international trade and has also brought Greece's economy a major boost. Then there's third-party market cooperation. For instance, China and Japan are considering developing infrastructure and energy projects in Thailand, which would bring the two sides and a third party tangible benefits. In addition, China has deepened its collaboration between the Belt and Road Initiative and other development strategies. Over the past 6 years, the Belt and Road has created more than 240,000 jobs outside China, with trade volume between China and BRI countries exceeding $6 trillion. Financial cooperation through the AIIB, Silk Road Fund, and Chinese-funded banks contributes to the development of various projects. Thanks to Belt and Road, China's friendship network now spans 5 continents. Suhua, CGTN, Beijing.
EU countries on Monday voted to approve the mandate for negotiating a new trade deal with the United States. Now, that vote gave final clearance for trade talks between the transatlantic partners to begin, despite France voting against the measure and Belgium abstaining. The European Commission said that under the preset conditions, the EU and the US will focus on eliminating tariffs only on industrial goods. The negotiations will not include agricultural products, despite the US demanding that they have to be on the table. Now, the other track of proposed talks would be to make it easier for companies to show that products meet EU or US standards. At the same time, continued confusion over Brexit in the United Kingdom has frustrated many SMEs and startups as well. They once saw the UK as their gateway into Europe and a stepping stone into international markets, but with big questions now around costs and regulations and labour, some are heading for far less risky locations in order to set up shop. CGTN's Juliet Mann filed this report from London.
When a coffee lover met a scientist, they devised a zero-waste capsule to fit everyday machines. Made in continental Europe, imported to the UK.
Smells great, huh?
Now concern that Brexit will grind down their margins means moving beans is moving on.
We're looking to places like Ireland or Germany as a place to headquarter the company, just so we can have that certainty and a bit more comfort and, you know, keep the business alive. It would mean that we don't have to pay these WTO tariffs, which would be in place if we end up with no deal. It would mean shipping is cheaper and we're connected with a big customer base as well.
As a world financial centre with innovation-friendly regulatory regimes, London has been a magnet for many start-up firms. But the London Chamber of Commerce says Brexit woes are spooking some investors.
We're seeing investors that would come in, maybe in property or retail or tech sector, just thinking, well, I'm not going to do that now because who knows what the situation is going to be in a couple of months' time or even a couple of weeks' time. So they're going to wait and see before they actually make that investment that could be in staff, it could be in equipment, it could be in research and development.
In short, business plans are being rewritten, particularly for the financial and medical technology sectors.
A big concern for startups in industries like fintech and medtech is regulation. That's why some have applied for licenses and approvals elsewhere in the EU to safeguard their European operations and ambitions.
Fintech firm Soldo, whose mobile app helps businesses manage their expenses, says keeping operations solely in London is too risky for growth.
We've been working, planning, and ultimately in the past year and a half executing basically a complete duplication of all the activities we had already developed and built as a regulated entity in the UK. So we created a second base of operation in Ireland with the end result that first of all everything has been a duplication, and secondly all the growth that was originally planned to happen in London will now happen in Dublin.
If there's one breed of business equipped to survive industry uncertainty and upheaval, it should be the nimble start-up. But it might take a Brexit breakthrough to stop some entrepreneurs walking out the door. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
Right, and back, of course, to a developing story that we're keeping a very close eye on. Police in Paris say that a fire has broken out at the city's Notre Dame Cathedral. Major operation is underway, trying to get this fire under control. Firefighters and other first responders are on the scene. The precise cause of the fire isn't clear just yet. Officials, however, are linking it to renovation work that was being done at the cathedral. Now, the area surrounding the building in central Paris has been cleared out. Last year, the cathedral launched an urgent call for funds to save the building, which is now starting to crumble. The Notre Dame's famed spire, it's about 92 meters tall, that has fallen. Part of the roof on this building that's centuries old has also collapsed into the fire. So let's get you the latest on this. CGTN's Oliver Whitfield-Miocic joins us now on the phone. Oliver, what's the latest? What more do we know about this fire?
So we are currently just stood on the Isle of St. Louis, potentially 300 metres away from the Notre Dame, and the roof is all but gone now. There are flames just looking into the sky, just where the intersection, the nave of the church is. You can see that there's a huge void. There's firefighters in front of us on aerial ladders who are trying to put water into the building, but at this point, it looks like a lot of damage has been caused. The surrounding streets have all been closed, and all around on every bridge leading up to Notre Dame, on all of the streets with a river view, it is just full of people trying to get a glimpse of what is going on. People are stood here with their phones out trying to film what is happening. People are very shocked at what they're seeing. This is a huge icon in Paris, a very popular tourist destination, something that has been immortalized in the Disney film The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So this is a very, very sad moment for the city.
Indeed, of course. Give us a sense of the history, though, of this building, because it certainly is iconic, but the deep nitty-gritty details of how this building came to be, that's not fairly well known. Give us the history 101, if you will, of the cathedral.
So this is a Gothic cathedral. It was built hundreds of years ago, and it wasn't really taken care of for quite a long time. Until the mid-17th century, there hadn't been any real renovation work that had taken place on it. And so last week, just as chance would have it, I was actually interviewing the chairman of the Friends of Notre Dame Association, and they are currently trying to raise around 150 million euros for this absolutely essential work, they were telling me, because the roof was at risk of collapsing. Some of the flying buttresses at the rear of the cathedral are also at risk of collapsing. That's because they're made of a very soft stone called limestone, and as acid rain has gone into it, it's caused some defects within the limestone support. So they've been trying to raise all this money, and they've actually managed to raise 3 million euros so far. So they were working on the most critical aspects, is what they told me. One of the flying buttresses, that was the most need, as well as the roof. And so you see this huge scaffold in front of us that they have been trying to carry out those works. It's unclear so far whether this has been some sort of accident to do with those works or whether it is something else. But at the moment, the fire is still ongoing. There's a lot of emergency services here on the scene.
Indeed. One last question for you, Oliver. So the cathedral, as you pointed out, was asking for cash to renovate it a little earlier. But as you pointed out, it's a major tourist attraction. It was designated as a national monument in the 1800s. I mean, surely this is something that the government should have been putting cash into.
So the government had pledged to put 40 million euros worth of this 150 that is required up for the fund. It is something that they've wanted do. But again, it's the French state at the moment, as you'll be only too well aware, with the Yellow Vest protest movement, with all of the demands that are currently being placed on the French government, they do not have all of the money in the world in order to give to this project. So in a sense, it has to be a civilian-run donation drive, as well as the French state putting that money in. But the questions going forward will now certainly be, should the French state have put the money forward quicker so that the works could have gone ahead faster than what was probably anticipated, but now looks like was potentially much needed.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you for the update there, Oliver Whitfield-Murcic, live, of course, in Paris. As we mentioned a little earlier, the Cathedral of Notre Dame, a building that's centuries old, finished around the 12th century, give or take, sorry, not the 14th century, around the 1300s, is essentially on fire as we speak. Those are some of the latest shots that we have from there. Now, we're still, of course, in Europe. A group of Czech mothers known as the Breastfeeding Guerrillas have staged a rather unique protest in the capital, Prague. The protest is a response to an incident at a local branch of Austria's Raiffeisen Bank in late March, when a security guard confronted a client who was breastfeeding her baby as she waited for service. It's also part of a long-running campaign to change public attitudes towards breastfeeding. The bank says its employee had not thrown out the woman, only they asked her, they say, to cover herself. Now, the bank has since apologized to the mother for this incident.
I would like the society to be friendly to its most weak and vulnerable members. That's something I will wish for my daughter when she has her own children.
The situation was a little bit different. According to available information, we know that the security guard asked her to cover herself and not to leave the bank branch.
Now then, over the years, robotics has developed at an extraordinary rate in different global sectors, and that covers everything from gaming to automation and manufacturing, even to the art. Now, though, robots can join you at the dinner table for the greater good. CGTN's Terry Wangari explains on what's hot tonight.
Innovation at the dinner table. Scientists have managed to program a robot to hand-feed individuals who are otherwise unable to do it on their own. This technology is groundbreaking in terms of innovation in healthcare.
In terms of just the technology itself, we are using multimodal sensing capabilities such as vision and haptic technology, which is the sense of touch, to be able to skewer a food item and feed a person.
According to research done in 2010, around 1 million adults in the United States need someone to help them eat. So the need for such technology is obvious. But as the project leader of this robot explains, it's not the hardware that is unique in this project.
A very big focus of our work is to be able to take existing hardware and be able to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to make it perform superhuman things. I think it was very important for us that we could take the same robot arm, the same wheelchair that these users were very comfortable using and were using in their homes, and retrofit it with our technology such that they were working with a familiar piece of hardware that was suddenly so much more capable because of the intelligence that was added into it.
The robotic arm has a pincer hand that can pick up a fork that has been equipped with a pressure sensor to prevent injury. That is the point where the off-the-shelf technology ends and the research begins. The process is more challenging than it might appear.
Eating free-form food is actually a very intricate manipulation task because this is a deformable object. They are hard to model, and it's in a cluttered plate, right? And so what we are trying to do here is using these multiple different modalities. We are trying to find what is the best way to pick up a food item such that it's not only successful to pick up a food item, but later on it's easier for the person to take a bite. So it takes into account both manipulation as well as human-robot interaction challenges. Next steps in terms of manipulation would be so that the robot can pick up realistic food meals, not just solid food items, but a plethora of other food items in a realistic meal, using different items of cutlery, as well as figuring out how to transfer it so that it is according to users' preference.
The system is still in its early stages.
Ready to eat. Let me get out of your way.
But the research team expects to take years to perfect the system by taking a more inclusive approach. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
All right, and a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So crude oil around the $71 a barrel mark. It's been there pretty much all day. And it actually did pull back a little bit, down about 0.5 percentage point lower in trading today. But even at these levels, still 30% higher so far in the day. You don't want to imagine the size of the energy inflation hit that's going to come in from that end. On Egypt, of course, as we pointed out a little early in the day, they're putting in temporary tariffs on steel and iron imports into the country. But they're arguing essentially that they're needed to keep out an oversupply of billet. Why? Because of tariffs imposed by the US. It's now creating a bit of a glut elsewhere in the world. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be focusing on platforms when we come back, looking at a Nigerian company that's promising to reach every home that doesn't have a cleaner of its own.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The president of the Seychelles has issued a powerful plea for global conservation from 400 feet below the surface of the ocean. This speech was broadcasted live from a submersible on the British-led Necton science expedition that's currently in the Indian Ocean. The East African nation's head of state's live broadcast from 400 feet below the water is the first of its kind in history. Oceans, of course, do cover over 2/3 of the world's surface, but for the most part, they're not really well known. They're mostly uncharted. Small island nations, like Seychelles, are among the most vulnerable to rising sea levels caused by climate change. On to Nigeria now. An online house cleaning service is promising to create millions of jobs for currently unemployed Nigerians. Kureen is the name of this service. It's an online platform that pairs house cleaners on one hand with homeowners on the other in need of cleaning services in 3 major Nigerian cities. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam has the details.
25-year-old Solomon Sunday gets ready for work. His tools, a scraper, some rags and bottles of cleaning detergent. Solomon is among a growing number of Nigerians who've signed up to Kureen, an online house cleaning service where cleaners meet those in need of cleaning services. Hundreds who can't find regular jobs make a living by signing up with the service. Even those with regular jobs have joined the platform to make extra cash. Before becoming a cleaner, Solomon struggled to eke a living. He earned only $50 monthly from his previous job, barely enough to pay house rent. He says he could triple that from cleaning houses.
I was homeless, but courtesy of Kureen, I've been able to get a place of my own. I've been able to fix my bills. As in, it has been great, it has been satisfying.
The service is currently available in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, in Lagos, the commercial capital, and Port Harcourt in the southeast. Its developers are targeting 15 million clients in those 3 states. But they have to build confidence in a market where most people are skeptical about letting a stranger in their home. Even though the Kureen founders say cleaners are enrolled after rigorous background checks, they now offer insurance to cover damages and losses for clients.
In Abuja only, we've served over 350 jobs so far and over 75 repeated customers and 25 Kureen as well have come on the platform. So yeah, it's huge. We look forward to more states.
Rakia has depended on Kureen to clean her house in the past months. She says she has built confidence over time.
As in what you have asked them to do, and they do it without tampering with other places that does not concern them.
Nigeria's unemployment rate hit 23.1% in 2018 from 18.8% in the previous year, rising from 111.1 million in 2017 to 115.5 million in the end of 2018. And simple innovations like Kureen are increasingly becoming avenues for millions. Kelechi Mekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies before we wrap up the program. So the rand in South Africa started off the day rather interestingly, 13.9566 at 11:12 GMT. It essentially continued a steady incremental run of gains we've seen against the US dollar from March. It did cede ground a little later on in the day, but even at these levels, it's about 2.7% higher against the American dollar. Pretty much the same story with the Egyptian pound, but that has posted much higher gains. 3.3% is a relevant number against the greenback. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. Do remember, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour or so. There are several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. Right then, on the day, of course, of the fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral, that's it for Global Business. Thank you for your company in the last hour. I'm Ramah Nyang. The World Today is up next from Washington.